Welcome to the Creative Condition Podcast, the show where I, Ben Talon, illustrator and writer, invite people from the creative industry and far beyond to share their story of creativity. Both the nature and the nurture, the chaos and the calm. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, something I'm increasingly fascinated by and so often misunderstood. So little by little, I hope to build an archive of fascinating stories, experiences and tips to help you maximise yours. The show is supported by Illustration X. Go and take a look at their incredible global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, go and listen to Dirty Freud over on Spotify and all good music platforms now.
It wasn't until, honestly, Donald Trump got elected that we really said, hey, we need to take a hard turn here and really focus on only doing things that match our values. And for me, that was a very personal decision because early on in my career, I had actually worked with the Trump Hotel collection at an agency. I wrote the brand guidelines for them. And I never really gave it a second thought because at the time, honestly, they were tacky reality TV stars. And it was just more, this was the assignment I was given at the agency where I was working. But then, however many, I think it was about 10 years later, to see that person, get elected to the most powerful position in the world and, be on the precipice of all this damage that they've now done, it really made me think, I need to think about where my time and attention and the talent of my team is going.
Today I'm joined by Smakk Studios founder Katie Klencheski. Katie built an agency to work with brands who commit to making a positive impact, to empower them to connect with their audiences and build meaningful relationships. And we get into what that means, into sustainability, into packaging, into design and the impact we can have as designers and consumers. Hello and welcome to the show. How are you doing? I hope you're good. I hope your creativity is flowing nicely. It's razzle-dazzling. It's fizzing all over the show. I hope you're good. It's been a strange time again. Interesting times. I speak to a lot of people, a lot of agencies, and there's still a lot of fear out there. I want to know how that's going for you. Let me know. Other people are awash with work, as ever. There are Jekyll and Hyde stories left, right and centre. Tumultuous times out there in the world again, but lots of opportunities to make great work surrounding that. A big thank you to the support of the shows mentioned at the top there, Illustration X. Their portfolios get broader all the time. New artists on the books, illustrators, animators, and you can see all of them over on their site, illustrationx.com. Been with the show for its entirety now, 7 years. Maybe it's even coming up to 7.5, I lose track. Coming up on that big magic 200th episode, I have no idea what I'm going to do for it. It's one of those things, some of these kind of cruise by. Other times you want to come out swinging and try and pull a recognised name in. But it's not about names on this show. There's been a few. Episode 50, I had Sir John Hegarty on the show. That was very exciting. One of the greatest minds that's ever worked in advertising. And that was full of insights. If you haven't heard that one, go back and listen. I loved illustrating Flat Eric. That's my big takeaway from that one. No. I'm joking. Loads of wisdom from John. He's a brilliant mind, and it was incredible to spend an hour in his company. I think I pushed that one a bit further, actually. I think I ended up with about an hour and 15 and was getting kind of hurried out by his PA by the end of it, which was great. You've got to milk these guys for all you can get. I hope you're good. I'm still buzzing from Off Festival. If you haven't got your tickets, I think the early bird tickets are out now for 2024. I've spoke to a few people who've already gone and got theirs. It's great. I met Abby Everett over there. If you haven't seen Abby's work, look her up, check her out. Really, really interesting stuff. And I believe she's already headed over to 2024. Got the ticket in the bag. I'm going to be having Abby on the show, which is very exciting. Great stuff coming up. Loads of good shows. Still haven't released Tom Hodgkinson, but that's a big one. Editor of The Idler. We're talking about idling and necessary boredom in this age of information. That's very exciting coming up. And I'm just back off interviewing Pretty Clever, an agency over in Bournemouth today, doing great work working in the do good space. I think that's what it was. I think that's what they called it. Founder John termed it as that. Great guy, great agency, really lovely little setup over there and doing some incredible work and really interesting getting into the ethics of that. And that's a big theme in today's episode with Katie Klencheski. So Katie has got her own interesting story, and she founded Smakk Studios, who are based over in New York in the States. And they work, like I said at the beginning, with brands who commit to making a positive impact. And what the work that they do is kind of broad within design, but also strategy and branding, and I think they even extend into bits of UX, I might have that wrong, to empower the companies who can connect with their audiences and build meaningful relationships. That's what it says on the tin. But Katie was full of energy, and her story is great, and the reasons why she got into this and how early in her life her leanings towards environmental and benevolent work begun. Very, very interesting to hear those origin stories. And fascinatingly and mind-blowingly, actually, Smakk Studios are one of the 1% of creative agencies owned by women. 1%? Can you believe that? I mean, I know it's a sausage fest out there, and by and large, a bit of a white sausage fest. Things are getting better, slowly but surely. There's more conversations, there's more inclusion, and, you know, there's a lot of work to be done there. But 1%, that kind of knocked my head off. I didn't realise it was kind of so drastic. I'd be interested to dig into that. Really interested. So if you've got any leads on that, send me some links. I'd like to hear more on the reasons why, and some of the science and the insights to that would be really, really great. Anyway, I've banged on long enough. Oh, actually, one little thing I wanted to just recommend before we get into this one, since we're on the topic. If you're not already familiar with the Blind Boy podcast, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderfully varied, what's the word? Just a varied, interesting, fascinating, insightful podcast. But there was a recent episode, and it was about mental health, biodiversity, and mythology. So he digs into kind of Irish mythology and the lessons we can learn about the current landscape and the climate. Very, very, to have the word for it, it's a great listen. But at the end of that, he talks about if you're lacking a little purpose or a cause, then there is no more urgent pressing cause than biodiversity, and that's something we can contribute to immediately. So whether you've got a tiny bit of land, a moderate or a generous bit of land on your property, or wherever you rent, or even if you don't, there are ways that you can contribute to biodiversity. Things like seed bombing and planting small wildflower meadows, which is something I've been doing. So at the ripe old age of 40, finally done a bit of gardening that wasn't just helping my granddad. And I'm very privileged to have some garden space. But it was amazing, just the physical work and getting my hands dirty and getting the kids involved. And I'm kind of on a mission to educate myself late in the day so that I can pass it on to my kids, so that it becomes a part of their knowledge and growing up, because we're going to need this stuff. I read that, and I think we've lost 97% of wildflower meadows since 1930. Can you believe that? When they're so critical to bugs and bees that we depend on for our food chain, that's startling stuff. And a gross illustration of the ugliness of capitalism and, you know, land use in this country. And it goes way beyond Britain, that's for sure. Anyway, please go and listen to the episode. If you're short on time, the last half hour or so is when he gets into the tips, but it's really, really great. And as ever, he puts it across in a very informed, impassioned way. So that's my tip for this one. Hit me up on the social, at Ben Talon or at Ben Talon Pod. Get us an email, hello@bentalon.com, but I'm not going to blather on any longer. Go and look at smackstudios.com for the work and the mission plan and everything else done by Katie Klencheski. And here is our conversation. Enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I was always like one of those kids who was, you know, in the corner drawing and doing creative pursuits. I think my mom would probably point to the fact that I would always win like these poster competitions that were a big deal in elementary school. And somehow they always had like an environmental bent. Like I remember doing one about like the water cycle and, you know, all like, where does our town water come from? And my mom was like, that was when I knew, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember doing this as a kid. We did right when recycling started up in the 90s, which we can talk about what a sham that is. But I remember that the town dump did a contest to have kids repurpose materials into sculptures. And we like went and participated in that. So I was always really into this idea of repurposing and second life of things like, early on. But yeah, definitely a creative kid. And I wasn't quite sure what you could do with that besides like be a famous artist. So
Do you know, I think so, despite all the tools we've got now to access information about the creative industry, I don't think it's moved along that much. I
no.
sometimes go and give talks for schools, and it still comes as quite the revelation that there's this big industry to a lot of the
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you think about like everybody in the world is walking around in the designed world as we move through cities and content and all of this stuff. And there's not that much awareness of who's actually making this and
Yeah,
how. Yeah.
it's true. So, well, that's really interesting then about the kind of early inclinations towards that. Do you think that was just something natural? You're just a caring person, or was there anything else that might have triggered that?
I think I was lucky to bump into some really passionate educators when I was younger. Like I remember in particular, I had a fourth grade teacher who was a huge environmentalist, and that really being something that was becoming a part of the consciousness, in the late 80s. And I happened to be in a community that was big into the conservation of wild areas and really thinking about the ecosystem and environment. And I did happen to bump into, a number of people who I think kind of planted the seeds early on that there was something bigger to think about in terms of our impact on the planet and, how we're moving through that and, what it means to be a consumer.
And I have to think also that there's this strong empathetic thread that runs through this industry. There's a lot of sensitive souls, myself included. Perhaps that's something innate. I mean, it's a big part of the reason that we gravitate towards this industry, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful way to put that because it's true. I think, their creativity, it invites you to be vulnerable, and it does take a certain type of person to take on that kind of work. And also it does involve a little bit of ego as well, right? To kind of put your vision out in front of people. But it takes both sides of that. And it definitely takes a different thought process. So I think you bump into a lot of people who are non-traditional thinkers when it comes to looking at things systemically and really trying to understand what's behind what we see out in the world.
Absolutely right. So what was the first, so you said about the kind of the famous artist being the be all and end all. What point did that change? When did you start to get an inclination that there was something that might be right for you as an industry?
So I went to school for studio art, and I really didn't think I would end up doing graphic design or anything along those lines when I was in school. Although I did, go to a school that had a graphic design program, and I had friends who were in it. But I moved to New York City really thinking I was going to continue doing drawing and printmaking, which was what my focus area was when I was in school, and ended up landing at an architecture firm where word got out that I knew Photoshop and suddenly was given a lot of graphic design tasks. And as I digged into it, I enjoyed it and I enjoyed doing that kind of work and, needed to pay New York City rent as well as my studio rent. So I started learning about that. I ended up going to a program at NYU and really getting into, very early web design kind of programs. And then from there, it was about moving in through advertising, getting into branding, and then ultimately landing where I did. But it was a lot of kind of ad hoc education that I did post my undergrad to really get into the industry because I was a little late to getting to know that I wanted to do things in graphic design and branding and advertising.
Mm. And how much value did you give to inner feeling? To kind of, because I was writing about this today, and I was saying, we're each on two paths. We've got the purist path, the childhood dreams, the kind of the purest stuff, and then we've got this stuff exactly what you hit up on there about having to pay those rents and to just exist in a capitalist system. Let's face it. And I
Yeah.
guess it's about trying to keep those two things as close as possible along the way and let them inform one another. Did you pay attention along through all these different roles about how you felt and where you might want to go?
It's interesting. I think I've finally gotten to a place where those two parts have finally converged in a place where they're meeting in a way that I feel really satisfied on both sides. And that's 20 years later. But when I was a student and I was doing studio art, I was also an activist, and I was really involved in a lot of social and environmental causes, nonprofits and different student movements alongside what I was doing. And I always thought that art had a role to be a commentary on things that were going on in society. And I always made art that had a political bent to it. So that was one side of myself. And then there was the side of me once I graduated that was, plogging along, trying to figure out, how is my career going to support myself and also be creatively fulfilling. And I did work for a lot of different kinds of brands at that time. But now, where I am at Smakk Studios, where the work that we do is really only for brands that we truly believe are making the world a better place. I am seeing the fact that the work that we do as branders, as building these vessels that go out into the world and ultimately can reshape them through consumer culture, those can be very powerful political policy machines that are helping people express their values through what they choose to purchase, and giving people better options. So it's interesting. I do feel like now the work that we're doing from a branding perspective is a really good expression of what my values have been kind of all along the way. But it's really only this far along in my career that I think those two roads have converged.
And I think that's something that comes up time and time again, and not just on this show, but in any conversation I have with people, is that we're all in a different timeline, and it can take years and decades to live enough life to really know where you need to land, and I think a lot of people will say, oh God, I wish I'd done this sooner. And then you go, you couldn't have possibly done that because you've had to live every aspect, good and bad, of your life to get here, and I think it's 20 years, there you go, another one.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put that.
So what's the origin story for Smakk? I mean, obviously we got that far. So what was the seed of that?
Yeah, we're 12 years old at this point. So I've now been working at Smakk far longer than anywhere else. And I started the agency. Really, I mean, it was a very organic start. It wasn't the kind of thing where, these days you look at so many companies that, startups that, they raise the capital and they have a business plan and all of that. And we really got started by, I was freelancing. I was working with friends. I had friends who were starting their own businesses and said, hey, like, we need help with this branding thing that you know about. And so I would work on those projects. And pretty soon it was, okay, I need to hire somebody to help me and hire somebody else. And before you know it, it rolls into having an agency. So I was a little bit of an accidental business owner, accidental CEO. But, obviously now we've grown, we're 15 people and, have had to really learn about, how to run an actual business. So, that does eventually have to happen.
Yeah. And how soon in the outward identity for the agency did you really push the strong belief that, you wanted to work with brands that could make the world a better place?
Yeah, so we were definitely lucky early on that we worked with a lot of brands that I felt shared my ethos in terms of, trying to do things more sustainably. We worked a lot with clean beauty brands and brands that were all about, let's make sure that the products that we're selling to people are certainly not harmful to them and progressive in terms of how we're thinking about wellness. But it wasn't until honestly Donald Trump got elected that we really said, hey, we need to take a hard turn here and really focus on only doing things that match our values. And for me, that was a very personal decision because early on in my career, I had actually worked with the Trump Hotel Collection at an agency. I wrote the brand guidelines for them. And I never really gave it a second thought because at the time, honestly, they were tacky reality TV stars. And it was just more, this was the assignment I was given at the agency where I was working. But then, however many, I think it was about 10 years later, to see that person, get elected to the most powerful position in the world and, be on the precipice of all this damage that they've now done. It really made me think, I need to think about where my time and attention and the talent of my team is going. And I really, if I ever have a doubt about the intentions of a brand or the people behind the brand, I don't want to work with them. I only actively want to put our time into projects that we can feel really great about. And when we look at what that company does and what they do with the work that we give them, we feel like this is something impactful that we've been a part of that we're really proud of.
Mm. And has that served as a great web, I guess is the way to put it, to attract like-minded clients? I mean, I even just from the standpoint of a freelance illustrator, I've always treated my portfolio just as much as a statement of intent as I have a showcase of what I've done. So did that begin to, I guess, to land you on the radars of people that you just described?
Absolutely. I think the second we kind of put that intention out into the world, we started getting just such a wonderful portfolio of clients that were coming to us because there was immediately this, we would just clock each other, it's like, hey, we're thinking in the same direction. And even when we don't get a chance to work with some of the people who might knock on our door, there's just such a wonderful group of individuals and people with beautiful visions for what business can do in the world who I end up getting to have conversations with because we attract their attention. And so when we do get to work on those projects, it's really great to be able to, progress somebody's beautiful vision for what a brand can do in the world. So, yeah, we've been very lucky. Once we set that intention, it really became just a lot of really great businesses knocking on our door and founders with really tremendous visions for, everything from social justice to environmental causes to a kind of greater understanding of what human well-being could look like in the world, to brands that are really doing amazing things with give back programs and thinking about how they can use their profits to forward causes that are important.
Mm. As I got a friend who's a founder, and he said to me in a recent interview that he really believes that business in the current model, business is the only real way to change things. Because he wrote this book and he was looking into the kind of UK political system, and he came away believing that there were so many party lines to be toed in politics that really it was going to be up to business in the system in which we live to really change those conversations. Now, I heard a previous interview that you did, Katie, and I admired your honesty about, if you really want to strip it down, then don't consume. That's the best way to not make such a negative impact. But that's not realistic, as we know, in this system.
Yeah.
Is that a sentiment you'd agree with?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about this at the agency the other day, and we were talking about, like, why brands? And there really is this possibility within business, within brands, that you can make change. And it does have to come down to businesses to make better choices. And there is a policy side to it too. But it's honestly, I think before you start to see these big changes happen, there has to be a rising change in public perception. There has to be a rising change in conversations that people are having. And for better or worse, brands are there. When we think about social media, a brand has just as much of a presence as a person. And so brands do have the power to change conversation. And then on the other side, they have, especially when you're talking about CPG and consumer brands where there's actually a product, there's an immense supply chain that goes into producing something that somebody buys. And the choices that a business makes have aggregate impact, which is much bigger than an individual's individual impact. So business does have the power to do it. There are bigger policy issues at play that can impact the choices that businesses have, especially small ones. So it is an ecosystem. It's not just one thing, but I think that businesses both have the responsibility and they do have the power to make really big change, especially when you see entire industries making wholesale changes right now. You see so many CPG brands really moving towards zero waste by dates that they've set in the future. And so when you see giant corporations like the Unilevers and P&Gs of the world saying they're moving to 100% post-consumer materials, they're saying to the supply chain, get ready because we're going to be asking for this stuff. So there's the potential for really big change to be driven by business. It needs to happen much faster than it is, though.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And it does have to be, everyone has to play their part top down.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, yeah, when you say that about, because Unilever, it's an absolute giant. Of course, decisions are probably going to take longer to implement when you're talking about that size of a model. But I guess it will not only inspire the smaller companies to make change, but it works in reverse, I guess, too, would it not? So that the smaller companies changing their ways almost puts more pressure on the big ones to do that.
Absolutely. And I think what we've seen recently is all of these direct to consumer and e-commerce brands and, these small startups that are really launching new products into kind of dustier, older categories, doing things where they're really shaking things up and telling consumers that they can expect more. That's driving change because these larger global houses of brands are saying, oh my God, these people are eating our lunch. We've got to get on top of this. So there's this, a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing, but it is something where I think small brands really have the power to change the conversation. And then that's going to force the hand of these larger brands. So, I really enjoy that we get to work with both sides of that because we are seeing change at either end. And being able to be a part of telling those stories to consumers and in the work that we do when we're developing packaging programs, really helping brands make better choices and then getting to educate the consumers about, what they're actually holding in their hands, I think is really powerful and really fun too.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I gave a talk recently and it was about how I'd become a little weighed down by the heaviness of the world. But with particular, the climate crisis was really kind of troubling me, especially as a new parent and long since been aware. But it was getting back to the roots of getting myself into an art school mindset to enjoying the creative again and being mischievous and having fun and playing, knowing that ultimately it didn't matter the size of the issue I was tackling. Being in that headspace was going to generate the best solutions, the best ideas. And it's not easy to do that because you have to learn to manage your mind because these issues are not going away.
Yeah.
But it can be fun. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that now. And it goes back to what I said about the emotional sponges that a lot of us are in this industry. It doesn't take much more than a heavy headline for some of us to be kind of knocked down for the day or longer.
That way too.
Yeah. So in regards to Smakk, where does your kind of remit begin and end? So we're talking CPG. Is it very heavily within the design sphere, or does the conversation broaden way beyond that?
Sorry, do you mean like in terms of what we do?
Yeah, in terms of the kind of the environmental, the ethical side of things, and what you do, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, well, so we work with brands really across the spectrum of launching new brands through to activities that are about driving brand growth. And so within that, we're building brand identities, but we're also building out all of the touch points that brands have with their consumers. So a lot of times our team is designing out packaging programs, or we're thinking about what that looks like across e-commerce or holiday for brands. But we also have a team that really focuses on telling those stories through D2C and e-commerce channels and building out websites. And then we do a lot of campaign work as well. So, we're kind of touching how brands manifest through the physical, through the digital, and through the content pieces. And within that, because the sphere of brands that we work with are typically CPG brands that are across wellness, personal care, this kind of bigger category that we're calling well-being, which is a little hard to pin down. But this year it's been everything from pet wellness through to financial wellness to brands that are more about nutrition and beverage and everything from spirits and wine. So we get to work with a lot of different kinds of brands, but the common thread really within them is that they are really focused on bringing better solutions for people and planet, and in most cases, both. And so we get to think about how we're telling their story, both in terms of what the products are, but also what the impacts of the products are. So we do that through the lens of all of those different touch points. And really at our core, we're branders, and we're really thinking about how do we create these cohesive brands across all of those touch points. But we do get to touch a lot of different pieces, and creatively that is a really rich process.
Yeah, I mean, I love just looking over the website, and I love the range in clients, the different approaches, and I love the taboo work that you did.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
It's interesting because I've had several people on the show in the past that have touched on the kind of sex and wellness industry.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine, Hazel Mead, right from coming out of university, she loved working with the kind of taboo subjects and creating them in a kind of fun, inclusive way. And she did it very, very well, and became a bit of a known face for that. And then I had Nadia Loscott on the show, who works for AMV BBDO, and she works on a fantastic campaign called Blood Normal, which was tackling this whole issue of period blood being depicted as blue on TV advertisements and how ridiculous that is in a world where we're exposed to so many things now openly, that was still this this real elephant in the room, and just an amazing campaign. And I just love to see how people tackle those topics creatively. And the thing with the taboo work you did, so sensual. I mean, like I think you described it as sleek in another interview, and it's the traditional way that subject is approached. And I just thought to turn that on its head so wonderfully was great work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that brand Taboo. And just for people who might not be familiar, they're a brand that makes basically a sexual wellness routine for women who are going through or have gone through menopause. And when we got involved in the project, I was shocked at some of the stats that we were looking at, which is that a lot of women, when they go through menopause, or people with vaginas, I should say, find that penetrative sex becomes really painful for them, and a lot of them will actually abandon that part of their lives based on that experience. And the founder of this brand, an amazing woman named Natalie, had a conversation with her mother about this, and she was shocked to learn that her mom basically told her use it or lose it. And so she created this product, which essentially is a really beautifully designed vibrator, and then some products that you actually apply with the vibrator that help solve this problem. And so the problem that she was seeing is that a lot of people weren't having this conversation. And so this was coming as a shock to them as they were going through this part of their lives. And there's a very real solution here. So we were tasked with rebranding them, coming up with a really beautiful packaging solution for the sexual wellness routine and the kit that she's created, and then putting that together through their digital channels, and really thinking about the positioning and the messaging and how we would communicate all these different facets of the brand to the end consumer. And it was a really fun project to work on. We found that, really women and people going through menopause there's a lot of brands that are now targeting this consumer, but I think they're still assuming that these are like old ladies. They're not thinking about like these women with really rich lives who are just approaching this age where suddenly, they need to address a really typical wellness concern. So we really got into thinking about how do we make this something that feels beautiful and personal and not taboo, something that actually feels like a luxurious personal care experience you can do for yourself, and really wrap this in branding that makes people excited to approach the product and not think of it as something that is down market or seedy, which, definitely there's a lot of brands in the sexual wellness space that, are try to be more sexy than anything and end up, I think, completely missing the mark. And we really wanted to make this something that felt really personal and luxurious instead.
It certainly gets that across. There was nothing in any way seedy about it. I think you've resoundingly succeeded on that one. And, so within the staff in Smakk, I would take a wild guess that there's a lot of empowered people going by just your energy and the work you're doing. I imagine that's a fun place to work.
I hope so. Right now, the biggest part of my job is making a great place for other people to want to work and to be able to do their best work. So I hope that they feel empowered and supported. That's really my main goal when I come to work every day, when I think about how I can support my team. And yeah, I mean, we're really lucky right now to have this amazing team of women and gender non-binary people. We're doing really fabulous work for so many different brands. I can't believe just like the world-class team that we have. Honestly, I'm really humbled that they've chosen to make Smakk their workplace home. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, I've come across other studios where I felt almost just a little tingle of envy and gone, sometimes when I visit, sometimes I get to visit studios to do these interviews, and it's a joy to see when people are so empowered within their their role. So let's talk about, have there been any instances where you've kind of had to not fight greenwashing, maybe that's a little strong, but change someone's perception that let me think how best to put this. So almost innocent greenwashing, if that makes sense, where perhaps people from a different generation, for example, might have approached this topic in a sense that is greenwashing, and you've been able to talk them around to why that is the case and how you can do this better. It's a very convoluted question, but do you encounter resistance? It is, I suppose, is a simple way of putting that.
We definitely encountered a couple different things. Yeah, for sure. We work with a lot of really large corporations that have big ESG or EWG goals on the horizon. And sometimes the conversation is, hey guys, you haven't done this yet, so let's not confuse the consumer by saying that something's happening when it hasn't happened yet. So that is definitely something that comes up. We've had clients that want to put a sustainability page on their website, and our copywriters are like, listen, there's really nothing to say yet. This doesn't make sense. You can't have the tab and imply that there's something going on when it's not happening. And most of the time when we brought up those issues, our clients are open to that. They don't want to be dubious there. So that's definitely been something that has come up. I think one other thing that comes up is we work with brands that they're taking on a lot of different issues. And sometimes they say, listen, like, we personally care about sustainability, but it's not our main goal right now. And so then we still try to be sustainable. If we're doing a packaging program for that client, we're still going to put forward the best solutions from a sustainable perspective. Sometimes we'll just not tell them that it's the most sustainable option. We'll just wrap it in really good design. Like sometimes it's like, spoonful of sugar, so that definitely comes up. And then yeah, I mean, the other thing that happens is sometimes our clients can't do the most sustainable thing for one reason or another, even though they want to. And this comes up a lot because supply chain still isn't there for the best solutions. So we have clients that they'll come in telling us we want to do 100% post, consumer plastic in this packaging program. And when we go to the vendors, we can't find it. And it's, how do they come to market without this solution? So we're having to weigh options sometimes. And the other thing is sometimes the most sustainable option doesn't on its face look the most sustainable, because sometimes we'll be looking at, different packaging solution. Always come back to packaging because it gets so complex. So complex. But sometimes you think, okay, we're going to use glass because that's the most sustainable, but glass is a lot heavier than plastic. And then you start weighing the emissions that are going to be used in the transportation of those products. So, it's not always the thing that on its face looks 100% recyclable is necessarily going to be best in terms of other issues that come into play with sustainability. So there's a lot that goes on. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then from a consumer standpoint, it can get confusing too, can't it? Because you find whether it's cruelty free or vegan, or even just the symbology within a packaging can be quite, not maybe not even intentionally, but it can be quite confusing knowing where that starts and where that ends, and whether this thing that you're trying to do for a noble, standpoint could actually be damaging because something else in the supply chain then gets affected. It's a minefield.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think there's even with the brands that we work with, I remember once we had a client that wanted us to put a leaf on the front of their packaging because they were using a bioplastic, and the bioplastic, it's not biodegradable. It just comes from a organic source. The afterlife of the product is no better than an petroleum-based plastic. So we pushed back on that because we were like, listen, this is confusing, and it actually isn't something that could or should be meaningful to the consumer, because it's kind of implying that a material is better when we don't know that it actually is, and it's not an eco-friendly product necessarily. So we do try to push back on some of those things. But you're right, cruelty-free vegan, those are important standards to a lot of people because they care about the treatment of animals and not using animal-based products. But for people who are trying to buy based on whether something is a more eco-friendly option, those aren't always standards that are going to tell you about the production of that product and whether it's something that uses less emissions or uses less resources in a way that's going to have a positive impact on the environment. But we do know that a lot of consumers conflate things like organic, natural, vegan, all sorts of standards that don't actually have a lot of bearing on what the product is and how it's made.
Yes, really well put. And in terms of the power of not so much creativity, but the designers and agencies like Smakk, I think you're a great example of reminding us all that we can be a part of these conversations with our clients. And is it something you would encourage to kind of not necessarily push back, but to highlight these things as and when we see them? Because I have other stories from other friends who've been involved on jobs. I think of one, and it was commercial office space, and they had this whole checklist of priorities when developing a new building. And my friend highlighted the small emission from this list, which was the local people around that building and how it would impact their life. And it was just simply something that they hadn't thought about. It wasn't any kind of coming from a nefarious place. And they actioned it. She raised this in a meeting. She was just there to design and to brand, but actually it kickstarted this whole chain of events where there was this thing that made the lives of the people better around that building. And like I say, I think Smakk is a great example. Is that something you would encourage designers to think more about and to push for better
Absolutely.
things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of little places that we not sneak in, but we've just made it a part of our process to ask questions. And the questions lead to bigger conversations. One of the things that we did early on, we always do an onboarding workshop with our new clients. And when we started saying we're only going to work with brands that are making the world a better place, we started asking just every single time, what are your sustainability goals for this project? And are there any nonprofit tie-ins or social impact tie-ins that you want us to keep in mind here? And just asking those questions, the client might not have brought us some of the details that they did in the brief, or kind of ask back, well, should we, or how could we? Which happens a lot now. So we see that like bringing that in ends up driving better conversations. Early on with our web work, we started doing work with a brand called Two Blind Brothers that they actually exist to fund research to cure blindness. Through the lens of working with them, we got really involved early on with ADA standards in terms of compliance and how we do our web builds. And once we did that project and we learned how to design to the highest standards for ADA compliance, we started bringing that into every single project that we work on. It ended up being beneficial to us that we were really advanced in the standards there, because people started getting sued for being non-compliant with ADA standards. And we were an agency who knew how to do that really well. But just thinking about, hey, how can we make this a site that's accessible for all users and build those standards into our practice, and ask our clients to consider different kinds of users when we were building our sites. That drove a conversation that maybe wouldn't have been there, but we just made it a part of how we started every web project. So I think, you can just ask these questions or make it a point of conversation that you always hit. and suddenly you're bringing your client along with you, and it is typically something that people care about, but they maybe it would have been an afterthought, or they wouldn't have thought about it, right at the beginning, when you actually have an opportunity to integrate it in a way that's meaningful to the project.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the human side of things. We can too often get caught up in the idea that we're a designer and we're serving something that's bigger than us. We're a part of an important ecosystem, and we when you think about that on a human to human level, most people will want to do some good if they can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the last things I want to touch upon. So there's a real the last 10 years has probably seen a major shift in social psychology towards sustainability and towards the way we're treating the world we live in. It must be an exciting time for you as an agency placed where you are. I think there was a statistic you said in a previous interview that I think it was 69% of people are prepared to invest their money in sustainable brands. That's a big number.
Yeah, I think it reflects more that they're looking for brands to solve problems, not necessarily sustainability. But what we are seeing is this massive shift where consumers went, I was reading a study recently that looked at the difference in different demographic groups and how they think companies should be involved in having a point of view when it comes to social change, environmental change, and really being change makers in the world. And boomers, it was a little bit less than half who believe that companies should actually be activists. But then when you go down to Gen Z, it's like the high 80s. They think that companies really almost are the most powerful force in the world to make change, and they expect it, in everything from the impact on the planet to how they're building communities to how they're fostering inclusion, and how they are really kind of radically reimagining self-expression for people. So we're seeing this huge shift in what consumers are expecting, and they really want these brands to be an expression of their own personal values. They want to put their dollars with a company that is a favorable mirror of how they like to see themselves moving through the world.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's a constant. Just from myself and the people that I know, it's right there. It's on all of our lips now, and I think it's been moving towards that point for a while. So, yeah, I think it's exciting. It's exciting to see agencies like yourself doing this kind of work, encouraging and keeps me above water. What's next? Is there anything exciting that you can tell us about what's coming up at Smakk?
Um, let's see. Lots of really fun things. I mean, we're working with a lot of brands right now that are doing some really awesome things. One of our brands that's just about to launch that we got to do some really fun sustainable elements within the packaging program is a dog wellness brand. Which at first I was like, wait a second, we're doing dog skincare now. But actually, as we dug into the project, I have two dogs. Most people at our agency have a dog or a cat, and most of our dogs have issues with their paws and their noses, and they have allergies and dandruff. And as we started digging into the project, we really got to know that there's better solutions for our furry friends. So it was really fun to be able to do a project that married our expertise within skincare and wellness and brought it to really our favorite creatures on the planet. And then to be able to do that with a sustainable packaging program was really fun. So that's something that we're launching. That's just like one of my favorite projects that we've worked on recently. We have a lot of other fun things that are kind of waiting in the wings. But we're really focused for the next, we've been shifting our focus to really being just about sustainability to now everything sustainability. And so we're really thinking about this bigger idea of the word well-being, and really thinking about that as people and planet, and how we're really using brands to create really great human experiences that along the way are doing good. And sustainability is one of the things that is integrated kind of always now with the brands that we're working on. but there's other facets of how we're also elevating the human experience and making sure that we're putting forward solutions that are healthier and also more joyful, because I think that that's a really important component. Like you said, all it takes is one bad headline to bring us down, but there's an opportunity to really spread joy and well-being in a bigger way. So we've been really trying to thread that through all of our projects as well these days, and also make sure that we're thinking about inclusion in a way that is bigger than just kind of checking a diversity box, but also thinking about, like you mentioned, taboo. That was really thinking about, there's a large group of women that once they hit a certain age, they feel like they're no longer included. And this was about really thinking about how do we create great experiences for them. And we're working on a couple projects right now that look at different audiences that have been forgotten oftentimes in branding and marketing, and really thinking about how do we not just market to them, but how do we empower them, and how do we bring them solutions that are really laser focused on their needs, and allowing them to feel more empowered in their daily lives. So I'm really excited about a lot of the projects that we're doing there. So
oh, it sounds very, very exciting. And I did one thing I almost forgot to ask about. I just wanted to ask briefly about the mission plan book, because that looked fantastic.
Yeah, that was actually something that we wrote right before the pandemic. And that was really like all of our playbook for how we help the brands that we work with become more sustainable. At the time, it was stuff that it felt a little fringe. Like it was like, okay, here's the stuff we're doing. Maybe people don't know about all of these ideas yet. And I'm really happy to say that like we're about to retire that book, just because it's something that I think has become almost industry standard. And when we wrote the mission plan, I remember talking about it with the group that was introducing it to our agency. We were like, why are we doing this project? And one of the things that we said is we hope that these standards become something that really is a playbook that everybody in the industry is using. And we're seeing that, when we look at work by other agencies, everybody's really trying to integrate this stuff in, at least the agencies that we're looking at. But it makes me happy to feel like this is no longer fringe, it's more table stakes. So, that feels successful.
That's a great reason to retire. I love that. Brilliant. Well, I think I've just about covered everything there, and that's been rather inspiring. And it's been a pleasure to chat.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
If you go and listen to any other interviews with Kay, she's very honest about sustainability, like I mentioned in the show, and the fact that, the ultimate way to be sustainable is to not consume or consume as little as possible, and, knock a few of them shopping trips on the head, and, kill a few gifts that maybe you could go and spend some time with somebody instead. And I'm very big on all this. I'm trying to kind of strip my own life to pieces and just be a bit selfless and cut a few luxuries, because we all have to start thinking a little faster on this front. And like I said at the beginning, do go and listen to the episode about mental health, biodiversity and mythology on the Blind Boy podcast. About 5 episodes ago at the time of recording. Really great listen. And if you like the mythology side of it, go back and listen to the kind of double episode that he did on Irish mythology and what we can learn about the land through that. Really, really amazing. Dan Kieran, who was on the show not too long back, his new book is out now. It's a Do Lectures book, and it's Do Business, starting and running a business that doesn't own you. Really, really great stuff, and anyone who listens to that show will know just how valuable that book's going to be, just going by what Dan had to share. And the reason I bring him up is he's currently working on a fiction book that does have some ties to that very topic, our separation from the land. So watch this space for that, because I think it's going to be a blinder when it lands. Dan is a very smart, lovely, interesting guy, so check it out. Thank you again to the founding sponsor, illustrationx.com. We are Illustration X on socials. Go and check out their wonderful range of global illustrators and animators now on their website. Thank you guys for listening. Please do support the show. You can do that by subscribing, reviewing, dropping a little, just sharing with a few friends. Please tell them if you like the show, because I don't get too many tags and shouts these days, but the listeners are still there. So please do spread the word if you get a second. It's very, very valuable. I do this thing out of pure passion. I love it. I'm trying to really get creativity to its right place in society, and my next book, well, my next non-fiction book, The Creative Condition, is going to be coming out hopefully the back end of this year. At the very latest, early next year. It's a labour of love. It's turned into a monster. More information coming up on a crowdfunding campaign, which I'm going to be launching. So you can support that. You can get your copy. You might even get a few other little goodies, depending on what I decide to do. But thank you ever so much for tuning in. It really does mean a lot. Keep doing so. Have a great week. I've said everything there is to say. I hope you enjoyed this show and look forward to everything that's coming up. Nice one, guys. Take care.